Susannah Dickey, welcome to the Great Big Book Club. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm okay, a little bit hot and sweaty, but I'm fine. I'm fine. You are the author of the brilliant new debut novel, Tennis Lessons. Do you have a copy?
No, I don't have a copy. I had a copy, and then my mother got in touch to say that a relative there being a generous term because we're quite tenuously related, had turned 17 and her grandparents were very keen for her to receive a signed copy for her birthday. So I dispatched that in the post. And now I don't own a copy of my own book.
That's really sad because the cover is fantastic.
It
It's
is
something sort of,
beautiful.
it's a really, really, really good cover. It's a sort of a girl snogging somebody in one corner. I'm not sure whether it's male or female. You don't really know. Lots of sort of beer bottles. It's like a perfect teenage party.
Yeah, I was so taken with the cover because you don't get a clear image of any of their faces. It's always slightly out of focus, or it's the back of their head, or it's in side profile. And then obviously the protagonist is this unnamed person, and you never really get a clear image of how she looks or what she is. So it felt so right to me. I could try and recreate it now. I could try and be all the characters on it, but I don't think anyone would thank me for that.
It's a perfect cover for what is essentially a coming of age novel, isn't
Mm.
it? Set in Northern Ireland, um, and you start. Well, you explain it. You start from the age of 3, and you end
Yeah,
at the age of 28. So why did you start at 3 and end at 28? Was my first question.
um, I guess I was really taken with that idea of the kind of life arc, and I was so keen to write it in this vignette style with the sort of jumping from age to age, because I was really interested in the idea of memory and its mutability and its fallibility. And I had this protagonist who clings so vociferously onto these arbitrary idle moments and encounters, and then uses them to kind of establish her entire basis of self. And I thought it would be really interesting to see her kind of trajectory, how she starts out as a person, and how you can watch that shift and mutate over time.
It's beautifully written, and it's written in the second person narrative, which I have to say I don't think I've read a book written in the you form ever in my life, and actually it really works. But how did you? Because you're almost like a voyeur on your own self, so it's almost like the older person looking at the present. I mean, I don't know whether that was what you were after, but that's what I felt when I was reading it.
Yeah, it's such a strange device. I when I started it, I had read relatively few things written in the second person. I'd read Joyce Carol Oates's Rape: A Love Story, and I'd read a few short stories by Laurie Moore, and Bright Lights, Big City by Jay McInerney. And what really struck me about all these books, how the second person worked in writing these characters, was it really established a sense of powerlessness in their own lives. This idea that life or the events of the narrative were things happening to them rather than things in which they were active agents or active participants. And that was something I really wanted to establish with this character, because she's so passive. And actually, in a few of the reviews on Goodreads, which I shouldn't read, but I do because I'm
Or a
a
masochist.
masochist. Yeah, I read them all. And some of the feedback was, I wanted to shake this person. She does nothing. And it's like, well, that's the point. That's the kind of person that she is. And the second person, I'm really fascinated by it because it's so much more illusory than first or third person, and it's so much more about who's being spoken to rather than who's doing the speaking. And it places the protagonist at this position of removal from themselves while also taking the reader and putting them in this position of almost claustrophobic, uncomfortable closeness. And again, that was something I really wanted to write. And that idea of powerless, and obviously she has a few moments in the novel of kind of, you know, brutality and trauma. And I felt the second person was really good at capturing the kind of frisson that happens as a coping mechanism following trauma, and that kind of distance you try to place between yourself and what has happened to you.
She's very much sort of buffeted by fate, isn't she? I mean, that's the idea, is that she has no power over her life, really, and things just happen to her. It's a very sort of passive story, but at the same time, it's a very active and interesting story. And it's been described as a sort of the millennial experience of growing up, of coming of age. How do you think that is different now to, say, 20 or 30 years ago? I mean, what do you think the storyline has changed?
I mean, I think so. I would say that certain pressures are different. That kind of mass conveyor belt of school students into university, that is maybe markedly different from how it was a long time ago. But also the additional financial constraints that go with it. I mean, my parents didn't pay to go to university. In fact, in the Northern Irish system of kind of social mobility, my dad was given money to go to university because he was in that financial bracket. Whereas now everyone is so, it seems like such a requisite to do it, but to do it, you're also taking on these huge debts and financial burdens and a sense of precariousness out the other end of it. And, you know, you see just these kind of low level, quotidian, very, I think, modern concerns filtering into her life and into her friend's life in terms of what happens to them and how they move. And she's probably someone who could have done with a few years to sort of figure herself out before she was buffeted into this system. But that's what happens, and it all becomes a bit of a maelstrom. And yeah, I guess, you know, and just in terms of her, you know, sexual encounters, how those even play out and how they manifest, those are probably very, you know, millennial events.
Yeah, because there is I mean, she does have sex at various points in the book, and there's one of them which she doesn't do very well, and so she goes to YouTube to Google how to perform a sexual act in a much better and more sort of perfect way. And I was thinking, when I was growing up, if you were just bad at something, you were just bad at something, and that would be that. But, you know, now, you know, everything has to be perfect. You have to be sexually proficient. You have to have no hair anywhere. You have to shave your legs. You have to. There's one scene when she realizes she hasn't bikini waxed herself enough, and his fingers get all tangled up and stuff. And it's very funny. But also, I was thinking, wow, you know, I was just rubbish at something, and so that would be that. I mean, the idea that you have to hit the ground running every time, I think, is very evident in this book.
Yeah, and also she's a person, she has this huge, you know, kind of ideological or like ontological gulf between how she thinks she needs to be and how she wants to be and who she actually is. And so much of the book is just her trying to reconcile herself with who she is as a person, as opposed to this idealized version that she wants to be. And I think you see in those moments, like, you know, the Googling how to deliver good fellatio, and even when she's in these sexual encounters, she's constantly so much more preoccupied with how she should look and what she should be doing than with the experience itself. And
that whole sort of slightly passive protagonist view, again, she's almost a voyeur on her own life, isn't she?
Yes, she's looking at herself so much more than anyone else is.
But there are sort of perennial tropes in the whole story that somebody as old as me would also recognize. So it's things like, you know, she was bullied at school. And if you tell a bit more about the story arc.
Okay, so yeah, she she starts off as this quite bright, promising child, a slightly idiosyncratic thinker in that way that is probably rewarded when you're very young, but then when you are thrust into the much kind of crueler environments of secondary school, become social markers of wrongness as opposed to interest. And she develops this very close friendship with one girl, Rachel, but I think she and Rachel are on slightly different paths in terms of their social maturity. And Rachel then brings her into this wider group of girls in which there's this real strong alpha character who takes against the protagonist in a quite insidious way. It's never anything so explicit as to be, you know, something that would be enough to make you walk away from it. It's this kind of low level, monotonous hum of cruelty. And that kind of occupies her entire secondary school experience until she can then get away from it. And she's clinging to this idea that she's going to get away from it. And then the middle section of the book is just one day when she's 17. And you find out that lots of different varying factors have come together to make her just really disorientated and you know, confused and frightened. And it's a day that she is placing so much importance on because it's the day of her first A level, and this in her head is her key. It's her key to escaping, and it's that idea, you know, that you think you'll like yourself more when you're in a different place, and that's an idea that really forms the tenet of who she is. But then all these factors get in the way, and the day goes just appallingly wrong at every level. And then the third section is seeing how that one day impacts on the years to come.
Gosh, yeah, exactly. And do you think, but it is also a story about female friendship. I mean, her and Rachel go all the way through, right up until the very end. They are besties for life, as it were. And I think, I mean, was that part of one of the ideas that you wanted to investigate when you were writing the book about female friendship?
For sure, because, you know, it's a book in terms of its structure, in terms of its voice, is maybe it's very actively cruel to her, and probably quite cruel to a reader, because, you know, you're giving a reader this very disjointed, unattached sense of who this person is, and you're being thrust with this real kind of propulsion through her life. And I thought, you know, a female friendship, and a good female friendship, is something that can kind of tether you. And Rachel acts as this real kind of emotional ballast. She's there with wit and with rationale and with just reassurance, and she's almost quite dogged in her friendship, because she knows who this person is and she knows what she needs, and she's there throughout to try and give her some sense of objectivity about herself, because her own sense is so deeply skewed. And I loved writing that, and I loved writing their dialogue and their interactions, because they're the most joyful moments of the book, because they're when this protagonist can stop with the constant introspection for a moment and just be with another person.
And did you, you're very good on the sort of parental relationships. And she has a very difficult relationship with her mother, who is, you know, as all mothers are, constantly disappointed in her, and her father is slightly distant. I mean, did you think that this was an interesting bit of, you know, bit of soil to till?
Yeah, I mean, I was so keen to write a nuanced depiction of both parents, because, you know, they're people, and as the novel transpires, you see that they have endured their respective sufferings, and they're not, you know, these pains to authority or knowledge. They are, you know, deeply screwed up in their own ways, and they're doing their best as parents, as parents do, and their love is quite clearly unconditional, but it so often isn't necessarily what's needed, or it manifests in ways that almost do more harm than they do good. But then, you know, over the course of the novel, you hopefully you see how things kind of even out eventually. Because, you know, it must be hugely difficult trying to raise a daughter. I mean, daughters must just be awful.
I have one, yes.
I mean, I don't envy my parents for trying to raise me. I'm a nightmare.
How much, by the way, how much of you is it you, and is Susannah? I mean, how much of it is it an autobiographical novel? Or
I would say that in moments she is the kind of culmination of the most extreme versions of my worst thoughts, you know, because, you know, I have a propensity for self-flagellation and introspection, and, you know, I totally get why people ask about the kind of autobiographical nature, because I think it's in our nature to base our liking or our trust in an author on what degree of kind of intimate knowledge we have of their lives. You know, I'll like you more once I know your shortcomings. I personally try not to hang out or consort with anyone who haven't had at least one catastrophic failure in their life.
welcome to my world, then. That's fine.
But I would say that mercifully, that's kind of where the similarities end. I will say that I have possibly an unhealthy preoccupation with the song Riders on the Storm, which is a recurring trope in the novel, and which I'm trying to make a recurring trope in every novel I write.
No, not in Growing Toenails, though.
No, I think we may have reached saturation point with Ingrown Toenails. I don't think I can be the laureate of Ingrown Toenails.
Very funny, very funny. But before you wrote Tennis Lessons, you are and were a poet. So what is the difference in the process of poetry to prose, and do you find the prose more interesting than the poetry, or do you think they complement each other?
I think they, well, in my perception, they do complement each other. People who maybe distrust or don't enjoy the ostensible plotlessness of Tennis Lessons might think they don't complement each other, because I think that's probably some runoff from poetry, is not a devotion or a preoccupation with plot so much as it is with, you know, language. I think poetry has made me really meticulous at a granular level about language choices and sentence structure and the musicality of a sentence. And, you know, in the kind of final editing moments of Tennis Lessons, I was neurotic. I was doing find and replaces for words like suddenly. I was like, this novel is 58,000 words long. I can't have the word suddenly 6 times. That's preposterous. I need to Google a synonym for suddenly, or a synonym for just, or a synonym for turns. And I think that also is a nasty side effect of writing poetry. But I would say, you know, and the poetry I write often has quite a strong narrative thrust. It's not so much a plot as there are, you know, things happen, and I think the two forms complement each other nicely in that respect. And I think poetry encourages you to try and interrogate day-to-day objects or encounters or feelings in new ways, and try to find the strange or the unsettling in the very average. And I think I brought that hopefully into the novel as well, because, you know, she's someone who thinks in a very kind of surreal way in terms of just how she views the world.
You did. I mean, there are moments of pure poetry in the book, which was lovely, lovely to read, and I really like the the second person narrative, and I think it's hugely successful. I wondered whether are you writing another one at the moment, or are you just releasing this baby?
No, I've written the first draft of the second one, which was something to keep me occupied during quarantine. 'Cause I guess the thing about releasing a book immediately post lockdown, or I guess while we're still kind of feeling the residual effects, is did you ever have a Furby?
Yes.
When I was little, I had a Furby, and I loved it. And one day, my brother's friend came around, and you know how Furbies subsist on human finger meat? They chew on human fingers. And my brother's friend was feeding the Furby, and he fed it overzealously, and the Furby's jaw slightly came unhinged. And after that, it was never quite the same. And we kept it in this cupboard. And at night, occasionally, you just hear the disembodied voice of the Furby. And that's kind of how it's been waiting to release a book. You know, when I still had the copy of it, I'd be in my room and I could hear it in the kitchen calling to me, like, what if people think it's derivative? What if your characters aren't three-dimensional enough? But having the distraction of trying to write the next book was very helpful in taking me away from my own negative thought patterns. And I think in some senses it'll explore some of the same kind of concerns. Things like obsession and the female body and female sexuality. But I think it will also hopefully look at things like, grief in a much more close-up way. It's going to be about two female protagonists, and it's going to be split down the middle. I'm going to attempt to emulate How to Be Both by Ali Smith, while also clearly being much, much less talented than Ali Smith. And you're going to see how these two perceive each other, and how one's actions impact on the other in slightly odd ways. There's going to be this very weird revenge arc through it, hopefully. But we'll see how that goes.
Sounds fabulous. What's the title for it? Do you know?
At the minute, the title is Common Decency.
Brilliant. Okay, and is that due out next year?
Oh, I think it'll be a while yet. I think it'll probably be 2 years from now that it comes out. Provided that I hand it in and they don't say, "This is terrible, you're banned, never write again, we're putting you in a volcano."
Listen, Susannah, your self-doubt is coming out of the screen. Honestly, Tennis Lessons is a fantastic book. Congratulations on such a brilliant debut. It's published by Trans World, and it's out right now. I mean, literally, it's wonderful. It's a brilliant coming-of-age story, and I think I shall give it to my daughter, actually, having read it myself.
Well, you can give her my apologies. Thank you so much.